Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. W.F. Strong.
Welcome to Good Books Radio, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Dr. W.F. Strong. Always glad to have you join us as we interview another fine author about his latest work. I want to pause a minute to welcome Phuket Gazette Radio to the Good Books Radio Network. Nice to be heard on those fine tropical beaches there. I'm always searching for books that amaze you and inspire you, books that will give you an education you can't get anywhere else. I found one. I am honored to have with me today, right here in the studio, Dr. Antonio Zavaleta, to my mind, the world's leading authority on curanderismo in Mexico and in the southwestern U.S. Curanderismo refers to the world of faith healers, sometimes also called spiritual or mystic healers. Dr. Zavaleta has been traveling Mexico and the southwestern U.S. for 5 decades, collecting the secrets of these healers. He has his Ph.D. from the University of Texas in Austin in anthropology. He has been a practicing anthropologist and a university professor all of his adult life. And even as a teenager, he was practicing anthropology, even though I'm not sure he knew he was doing it at the time. He has just published a new book on Mexico's foremost curandero. It is called El Niño Fidencio and the Fidencistas, Folk Religion in the Mexican and U.S. Borderland. Fascinating, mesmerizing work for anyone interested in this magical world of spiritist folk saints and healers. So let's get started. Tony, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it very much. It's good to be back. It's good to see you.
Oh, good to see you, buddy.
Thank you.
I want to start with, because a lot of our listeners probably are unfamiliar with the word curandero. You've lived with it all your life.
That's right.
What does it mean?
Well, in Spanish, it comes from the verb curar, to cure or to heal. So the curandero or curandera is the person who heals. And in fact, there's a lot of, if you go back to the original Spanish archives from when Spaniards arrived in Mexico in the early 1500s, there are a lot of references to the native Nahuatl curandero. So it's been in practice in Mexico not only for the last 500 years, but probably for several thousand years.
So are curanderos Catholics?
Well, it's interesting you asked that because I've asked that question for 40 years at least, and the answer almost always comes back yes. Yes. There's a major religious component to curanderismo and curanderos, and it's almost always Catholic.
And but is there a kind of bridging of kind of a unique spiritualism along with Catholicism?
Yes, the curandero the curandero doesn't recognize a division between Catholic beliefs in Catholicism and curanderismo. It's all one process in their mind, and every self-respecting curandero is going to tell you. And when I say curandero, I'm also /a curandera.
Curandera, right.
All right. They will tell you that they don't heal. They're the instrument. They're an instrument of God. Mm-hmm. They've received a gift, a don in Spanish, from God, a healing gift, just as a Niño Fidencio did, and so they work with God. They work with their patron saints. Mm-hmm. Very often there are a whole pantheon of Catholic saints that are utilized, especially the Virgin of Guadalupe, for healing in Latin America.
Well, you say that you worked for 25 years on this book. That's a long time.
I worked for 25 years on this book, and at least 20 of those 25 years I was in the administration at the University of Texas, Brownsville, and Texas Southmost College. So I didn't have time. I continued the field work, but I didn't have time to think about it, sit down and think about it. So that in the last 5 years, I put this book together. I sat down and I thought about it because it was so complex that I didn't know even know how to start. I'm very pleased with how it turned out.
Oh, it's a wonderful book.
Thank you.
Now, do curanderos see Jesus as a curandero?
Yes. Curanderos see Jesus as the ultimate healer. In fact, I was on my Facebook page this morning, and here pops up Jesus the healer, and I commented on that, and I said Jesus is the ultimate healer. So yeah, that's very insightful. That's true.
Now let's talk about El Niño Fidencio.
All right.
Would you call him the top curandero in Mexican history?
It's arguable, but I would say yes. I would say that the Niño Fidencio, his name was Jose Fidencio Cintura Constantino, and he is, I think, without a doubt, and historically, Mexico's top curandero, most famous, most infamous curandero.
And what made him special?
Well,
I mean, in a way, you've written the whole book to say that, but
no, it's a good question.
In a tight form, what made him special?
What made him special is that was the beauty of his history. Okay, he appeared on the desert in northern Mexico during and after the Revolution, when a time of great need, a time during the Cristero Revolt, in which President Calles and other Mexican presidents were martyring Catholic priests and expropriating their property, and it was a very, very difficult time. And then this young man appears, and he seems on the desert, and there's a story about how he got there. He begins to heal. He had an affinity for animals, and that's very reminiscent of Saint Francis of Assisi, who was a saint of animals. And the Niño would care for the animals. The animals would follow him around. He's a young boy. He's actually a kitchen worker on a hacienda in Nuevo León. And animals would just wait for him and follow him around, and he assisted them in their births, so that when a goat or a horse would have a breached birth, he would assist and deliver the new colt. And so then...
How did he know how to do that?
Well, that's a question that we often asked. And he says he can't answer. He couldn't answer. He said, I don't know. I just know. I don't know how. I just know. It comes into my head.
Huh. Wow, how interesting.
But I wanted to finish. Let me finish,
go ahead.
And I'm sorry. Because then, in the little village where he lived, Espinazo, Nuevo León, there was a woman who was about to deliver, and she was going to have a breached birth. And so in those days and in those places, that was death. I mean, she was going to die, the baby was going to die, and they said, well, call Fidencio. And he delivered that baby and saved that woman and that baby. And that was the beginning of his fame. That was about 1923.
Well, I want to read from your book something you said here.
Thank you.
Mexico's Messiah was always represented as a peasant and as poor as the people who sought deliverance at his hand. And how is that? How did that come about? That needed to be?
That's a beautiful quote, and of course I'm quoting. And this book is about. There's so many aspects of it. It's very intricate. Those words are from Marie Brenner, and she wrote a book in the early 1920s entitled "Idols Behind Altars." That's the name of her book.
What a good title!
It's a wonderful book.
Good title.
Idols Behind Altars, and she talked about, and it was a time, it was the beginning of the early 20th century. In just a few years, there was going to be a change in the millennium, and so there was a whole millennial fervor, and people were, as they always are, awaiting the coming of the Messiah, and so that's where, and they believed, and she wrote, because she studied with the Nahuatl people in Mexico City, the fact that the Messiah, very often native peoples, almost always native peoples, expect the Messiah to be one of them. So brown as the earth, barefooted peasant. And so when the Niño Fidencio shows up, he's brown as the earth and a barefooted peasant, he was designated as the Messiah. Here's the Messiah.
Who didn't he heal the president of Mexico?
He did. We're told. The Calles, unannounced, with no itinerary, It was in the middle of the Cristero Revolt, and Calles could have been easily assassinated. He boarded his train, which is called Olivo, the olive, right, train,
Yeah.
and went, and he had several stops to make in Nuevo León and in Tamaulipas to inaugurate public works projects. So he said, well, let's go over to Espinazo. Because the rail, Espinazo is actually still is a railroad stop on the main railroad line down the middle of Mexico from the U.S. border all the way down to Mexico. So Calles shows up in Espinazo, and he says, well, where's this Fidencio? Why isn't he? Calles was a larger-than-life General Calles and a person to be feared. And he says, where's this Fidencio person? Why isn't he here to meet me, to greet me, the president? I'm the president. I'm the Maximo Jefe. Well, Fidencio stayed in his house. He didn't come. And he made, when he was asked about it, he said, the president is a human being like any other, and he has to walk. He has to make the pilgrimage and walk from the railroad station, which is about a quarter of a mile, up to the where Fidencio was. He has to walk. God requires that.
Oh,
and so he did, yeah. And Calles was locked in a room with Fidencio for about 6 hours with none of his aides and nobody else. And people began to worry. My God, what's happening? What about the president? How do we know he hasn't been killed? When the president emerged, I mean, he was just elated. He was overjoyed with what he never really described. It was believed that he had a skin infection, as very often military people in those days. Some people say he even had leprosy, but we don't know that. And he claimed to have been healed by Fidencio. He was so grateful. He turned to his people. This is all documented. He turned to his people, his entourage, and said, ask him what he wants. Give him anything he wants. And there was no water in Espinazo. And the nearest spring was in the mountain range right behind Espinazo. Was about 10 kilometers. There's a natural spring called La Gavia. And Fidencio said, well, we need water. We don't have water. And so the president ordered his engineers to build a pipeline from the mountain 10 kilometers down to Espinazo. And to this very day, that's the only source of water there.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Talk about leaving a wonderful legacy.
He left a wonderful legacy, yes, that's right.
Now, Espinazo is probably more important today than when he lived there, right?
It is probably more important today because it has become a major pilgrimage site. And in fact, it is, it is, I'm not going to put it on the same level as La Villa in Mexico City, the site of the Virgin of Guadalupe, but it is a major pilgrimage site. And 2 times a year, in October and in March, there's a huge fiesta, a pilgrimage fiesta, and easily 50,000 people will show up. Mexicans and Mexican Americans in Chicago, in the state of Washington and California, will schedule their vacations around the fiesta and drive with their families. It's been difficult in recent years because of the violence in northern Mexico, but they'll drive from Chicago, because I've interviewed hundreds of them, to Espinazo to attend the fiesta. It's amazing because you'll see license plates from all over the U.S. and Mexican states who come to that because they're either looking for a miracle or they're giving thanks for having received a miracle.
And this is where many people will walk on their knees for several miles or something, right?
About a quarter of a mile.
Quarter mile?
Yes. They do different things. They will walk on their knees, they'll slither along on their backs. That's the way I did it, which is kind of the coward's way out, because I was told that I had to do it, right? And I couldn't say no, I had to, because in anthropology, we do what is called participant observation.
Right.
And as I said, if you're real, if you expect us to trust you, we want to see you do the pilgrimage. We want to, and so I had to do it.
And what did you learn from that?
Well, I tell you what, I learned that the whole I don't remember it. I think I was in some sort of trance state, and it was a spiritual trance state because it began and it ended. And I don't know how I'm being very honest with you. I don't know how I got from point A to point B. But I did, and I kind of came to my senses, and I was there at his tomb. Today, the pilgrimage site is graced by the tomb of the Niño Fidencio, which is right there. I did that.
And he has his own church, right? It's not a part of the Catholic Church.
No, that's right. Some of his, not his legal descendants, but the people who were always around him in that family, the family that took care of him, President Salinas de Gortari, from the time of Calles outlawed religion in Mexico. And even though we know the Catholic Church has been there, it's illegal. And so from the time of Calles in the 1920s to the time of Salinas President de Gortari in the 90s.
Right.
Yeah, in the 90s. Religion was illegal. So President de Gortari declared religion is now again legal in Mexico. And so the family went to Mexico City, filed a petition with Gobierno, Department of State, I guess,
right,
and created the religion of Fidencio, Iglesia Cristiana Fidencista.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's Christian.
Yes.
But it's his own congregation, I guess.
In the early days, and now that was in the 1990s, about 93. In the early days, and I'm observing the whole time, I'm there every single day.
Right.
In the early days, what they did was copy Catholicism. Okay. But in recent years, their religion has morphed into its own religion, which you would hope it would, and it has. And so it is less today Catholic and more its own Fidencista religion.
Okay. Now, he had some, I believe he had 10 rules for healing or some sort of guidelines. Was that him, or is that some other healer?
That was someone else.
Okay, because they cover it in your book.
My book.
Okay, I didn't.
There's a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first, I would say the first 20% is just getting you ready for the arrival.
Well, let me tell you about
that's important.
Those 10 rules of healing, since you bring them up.
Yeah.
Those are 10 rules. There's a psychic healer called a psychic healer in Spain. And the Niño Fidencio had said, I will go, when he was living, he said, I will go to wherever I'm needed. And so this healer in Spain, who channels spirits in Spain, one day channeled the Niño, quote unquote, brought down the Niño Fidencio. So the Niño Fidencio appeared in Spain. And that's very, very significant to me, and I talk about that in my book. And his rules, his being the healer in Spain. In fact, I need to send him a copy of the book.
Was this when he was alive? Niño Fidencio?
No, long after. No, this is recently.
Okay, but he was also one who could be in two places at once, right?
He could do. He could bilocate.
Bilocate.
And
that's what I'm looking for.
He could do it. He did it frequently. And not only could he, I haven't finished the other story, but not only could he bilocate, he could change his appearance. So you couldn't recognize him as who he was. So he would literally change his appearance, his skin color, his eye color, his height. Yes. But just finishing the story, the fellow in Spain brought down the Niño, and those rules of healing are like, for example, you have to be pure of thought. He won't do any witchcraft. You have to wear white. When you come to that sort of thing. Yeah, those are the rules.
Well, I found those fascinating, really. You can't accept money for a healing.
You can't accept money. That's right. And the Niño Fidencio, he had no interest in money, while it is reported that there were literally piles of gold coins in Espinazo. People would bring him money. He didn't touch it. He didn't want it. But there were, I would say in today's dollars, millions of dollars were donated and left there. Interestingly, we don't know what happened to any of it. It's all gone.
Well, tell me about him. What was he like?
Well, he was the Niño was a very humble, a barefooted peasant boy, young boy.
Was he illiterate?
Excuse me, he was illiterate. He did attend elementary school in the state of Guanajuato for maybe, let's say, he had maybe a second grade or third grade education, but he wasn't suited for school. He did not really learn to read or write. He could sign his name and did that once or twice, but he, from when the time he was a school kid on the playground, he was strange, and he would scare the other kids because he could. They played a game where they would hide something, and ask the Niño, who was just a little kid, like say 8 or 9 years old, what was it we hid and where is it? And he could tell them what it was, and he'd go right to it. And that he did that so frequently. So he was obviously in Spanish we would say a clarividente, a clairvoyant. And he would scare people, right?
And I read in your book that he had a kind of high-pitched voice, and his voice never dropped.
No, it didn't. That's right. The Niño, and this is direct testimony, okay, from people. Well, in the early days of my investigation, I was fortunate to interview. There were still, going back to about 1985, there were still 5 or 6 people alive, living in Espinaza who had known the Niño and worked with him and for him. And I interviewed all of those people, and it's in my book. The Niño, I'm told, but universally, never acquired secondary sexual characteristics. All right.
Okay.
American anthropologist June Macklin, in her work, who before me was the only American anthropologist to study Fidencio, thought that he was more than likely a Klinefelter syndrome male, meaning he had an XXY chromosome characteristic. And so in Klinefelter syndrome males, there's generally no secondary sexual characteristics. So by that I mean they never develop a masculine voice. They don't have any hair, facial hair, axillary hair. Their reproductive organs don't grow. So that's one of the reasons he was called Niño. The people who actually bathed him, he would be bathed.
Yeah.
Dick told me that he had no adult male genitalia. He had the genitalia of a child. And hence he was called Niño. And hence he had a very high voice, not a voice like yours or mine. And interestingly, today some of the mediums, trance mediums, materias who channel him, they put on that voice. I think it's what I call spiritual drama or spiritual theater. But they affect that high voice, high-pitched voice.
Well, you also mentioned in the book, when I was looking at his methods of healing, one of the things I found astounding was people would say that he performed surgery without anesthetic and people felt no pain.
Many well-documented cases, because all of his procedures were documented by the major newspapers out of Mexico City and Monterrey, Saltillo sent people. The New York Times covered him. Hollywood sent a crew out there to do a film clip that you saw at the movies back in the 1920s. And the Niño he would perform surgeries on the ground, not on a table, on the ground outside, and he would ask his assistants to bring him a sharp piece of glass, break a bottle, bring me the sharpest, and using that piece of glass, he would perform a surgery. We're talking about opening people up, and there, as reported. It's very similar to John of God in Brazil, or Arrigo, the Brazilian psychic surgeon. There was no pain and no sepsis, allegedly. There was never any infection, nor did the people feel a pain of the surgery. That's right.
And this was always free?
Always free, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, he never charged.
Now, what did he do with the mud? He had like a mud vat or something that he would use for healing purposes. How did that work?
Well, around that area, which is 90 kilometers northwest of Monterrey on the road to Saltillo, to Monclova, there are a number of hot springs, sulfuric waters, and he recognized or was told spiritually that they had healing properties. And so he created his own mud pool, which is there today. It's called the Charquito, and it's just a big mud pond. And he would rub the mud on people, and people would have to get in the pond, as they will in a couple weeks, and cover themselves with mud, which was sulfuric mud, which is considered to be healing. Yeah.
I ask you to read for us a part of your book that you find special. Would you do that?
Yeah,
now,
I picked out two, but ones that I think are important, that are interesting. And I'm reading from page 88. During the course of his lifetime, El Niño Fidencio had several supernatural experiences in the form of revelations from God the Father, Jesus Christ, as well as other celestial beings. On September 21st, 1925, Fidencio had a life-changing religious experience, including a vision and spiritual message that would influence the rest of his short life. While meditating under the centrally located pirul tree, and a pirul is a California pepper, in Espinazo, Fidencio had a vision of an old man in a flowing white beard, ostensibly God the Father, who announced his gift of healing and asked that he prepare for a life of suffering, hardship, and most importantly, service to humanity through healing and the working of miracles.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that awesome?
That's his road to Damascus moment, you know.
This is my greatest work, let me tell you.
Wonderful.
I've been writing for many years, but this is inspired by a muse. And I got to tell you, without trying to be any weirder than I am already, there were times when this stuff would just flow. And I'm not going to say it was automatic writing, but I would write stuff, and then a couple pages, I'd go back and read it, and I said, where in the heck where did that come from? So who knows? Maybe El Niño
is helping you.
I've seen him a couple times.
Oh,
absolutely. You want to hear about that?
Well, we've got 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
2 minutes. Can you believe it?
No. How long have we been here?
So you've been channeling again.
Yeah. Well, I was driving with a curandera from Brownsville down to his birthplace in the state of Guanajuato. We approached a railroad, and if you're prudent, when you come up to a railroad crossing in Mexico, you'll stop.
Right.
And we did. And over to the side of the road, on the driver's side, there was a monk, and he was dressed completely in his monk habit and his face covered, and he had a basket, and he walked up to the car. And when he got to I rolled down the window, of course. And when he got to the window, he looked up, and lo and behold, it was the Niño Fidencio. I'm not talking about someone who resembled the Niño. This was the Niño Fidencio, and he blessed us and thanked us. We were on our way to the place of his birth, his birthplace.
Yeah.
And he said, "Thank you for coming to my birthplace."
My. Well, I'll tell you, it's a fascinating book, and you've got, a world of great stories to go with it. You have a book called the El Niño Fidencio and the Fidencistas.
That's right.
What are the Fidencistas? Are they followers? What are they?
Yeah, the Fidencistas are the followers because we didn't mention, but the Niño Fidencio died. He was born actually in 1898 and died in 1938. So he was just short of 40 years of age. And he predicted in life that he would live on and that we would walk among us and that there would be people, and he would continue his healing ministry by working through trance mediums, very much like most Americans are familiar, or some Americans are familiar with the work of Edgar Cayce. who was a
Yes.
trans medium. Okay,
Yes.
so sure enough, before his death and after his death, and including continuing to this day, there are people right here in Brownsville, right, just a couple blocks from us, who are trans mediums of the Niño Fidencio. That's how he continues his healing ministry. And in the Mexican American community, the Mexican American community, by and large, has not had access to health care, and especially mental health care. And so these curanderas, this is a whole cadre of curanderas who heal. For example, today, Friday, there will be people lining up to speak to the Niño Fidencio through a trans medium. Those are Fidencistas, the followers of Fidencio.
But to be a Fidencista, do you need to be one who channels him, or
No.
can you just be a person who loves him?
All of the above.
All of the above. Okay.
Yeah, all of the above. Yeah.
So-
But mostly the Fidencistas are mostly followers, believers.
So you have a section of the book that deals with this.
Yeah.
So
Let me just
that.
read briefly. Reading from page 192. Fidencismo is a benevolent, healing, millenarian cult. That's a healing cult. That imitates the life of Christ and was initially styled after Catholicism. Therefore, petitioning the Niño for miracles, fulfilling promises by completing a pilgrimage in return for a miracle granted, is a familiar ritual cycle. The followers of Fidencio fulfill their promises by completing a trip to his holy site.
Okay, well, that's very clear. That's very clear. Now, will he ever be recognized by the Catholic Church as a saint? Is there any possibility of that?
Well, it's been there was an application made, but most likely not, because the Catholic Church in Mexico and the Catholic Church in especially Nuevo León and Coahuila are still hurting and offended by the fact that he performed all of the sacraments. He said Mass, he gave communion, he baptized children, he married people, and the Catholic Church just can't get over that. And so it's interesting because in any other place and any other day, there are dozens and dozens of saints in European saints and others who were just like him. They didn't have to be priests, they weren't or nuns, they weren't religious people, but they performed miracles. And they're declared today saints. But I don't see that, at least in our lifetime, ever happening with Fidencio.
Well, you tell the story in the book about Real de Catorce
Yes.
having a special place in the world of miracles.
It does.
And more important than some of the places in Italy. How is that so?
Well, I have a funny story about that. Real de Catorce, for people that know it, is up in the mountains in San Luis Potosí.
I've been there.
Right outside of Matehuala.
And I could barely breathe.
Exactly.
It was so high up.
Well, you can go even higher. From Real, you can get a horse or a mule or walk up to the top of the world, where the Huicholes believe the sun was born, and you could do peyote up there and so forth. Anyway, that aside, the Real de Catorce has a major cathedral, big monster. You probably were in there, dedicated to Saint Francis of Assisi, San Francisco de Asís, and there's a life-size statue of Saint Francis sitting on a throne, and the people there will tell you that they'll see him walking around town, and sometimes the people that care for him will come in, and he'll have mud or dirt on his shoes, which is testimony to the fact that he was walking around. But of course, we know that Saint Francis is from Assisi, Italy, and I had the opportunity to visit there some years back, and I bought a rosary for a friend of mine who is a curandero and a fidencista, and who's very dedicado to St. Francis. And I gave it to him. And I said, here, I brought you this rosary from St. Francis. And I brought it from Italy. And he said to me, well, everybody knows that St. Francis is not from Italy. St. Francis is from Real de Catorce. I learned a valuable lesson that day, that the folk have their own way of thinking and believing, and we as anthropologists have to accept that. And I wasn't going to argue with him. No, you're wrong. St. Francis from it. I mean, what good would that have done? So I didn't do that. I learned a lesson.
Has El Nino showed up in popular culture? For instance, when I was watching the show Breaking Bad, which is very popular, there were a couple of assassins in the show who were walking to a shrine on their knees, like going 5 miles on their knees. And I believe that they were at least referring to El Nino without naming him. Do you know of him showing up in popular culture that way?
Well, Mexican television has done a series, almost like a soap opera series, called El Niño Santo. That's recent. And so but it wasn't convincing. They changed it so much that it hasn't continued. And then an American television company decided that they would do an adaptation for American TV, but then that fell through also. I don't know if I'm answering your
question. I just wondered if I know that I read somewhere that he was in a Tarantino movie, just a reference to him. And so I'm looking for evidence of him being in popular culture.
Well, I think it's all over the place. I think.
Does he have a Facebook page? I bet he does.
He has several Facebook pages. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, people have put up for him.
Sure.
And of course, there's music. There are Fidencista temples or shrine, healing temples all over the country. And I mean, there are tens of thousands of Fidencistas who talk to him and go to see him every week in places around the country, and then go to his pilgrimage site during the fiesta, one coming up in a couple of weeks in October, around October 16th. So I would say, and I'm happy to say, the Niño Fidencio, in speaking through the head materia, the head of the church, declared that I was his secretary. He said, it's in the book. He said, it surprised me. He said, I want everyone to know. He had all his hierarchy gathered there, and he said, I want you to know that he always called me Zavaleta. Zavaleta. Zavaleta is my secretary. Respect him as such. So, this is why I say that the 4 books that I've done on or about the Niño Fidencio have, I think, greatly enhanced people's knowledge of him. Right. And so from that perspective, and I'll tell you another story, I think they're very valuable. Now, I was speaking here in McAllen. The head of the church came to McAllen, so I was very, very grateful. So we could sit down, I could interview him a couple years ago. And I thanked him for coming, and I thanked him for his interview and for being so candid. And he said to me, you don't know how much we value you, because you have done more for the knowledge and the belief in the Niño Fidencio than anybody else. And we want to interview you for our archives so that after you're gone, we'll have that testimony and that story of what you experienced here, because I began my studies about 1985 all the way through the present. And so I've seen, 25, almost 30 years of the development of Fidencistas and Fidencismo.
Well, let's suppose that, suppose I'm a person who's suffering from chronic anxiety and tequila's just not doing it for me anymore. Right. Can I, as a pinche gringo, go down there to Espinazo and get help?
You sure could, but you don't have to go to Espinazo. You can go across the street here in Brownsville,
right here?
Edinburgh, McAllen, and there will be a person, usually a woman, but not always, who is a curandera who will on the days that she works, heals, will go into a trance, bring down the Niño Fidencio, and you'll be able to personally speak to him. And I'll tell you a story about that. Here in Brownsville, Texas, or Edinburgh, or McAllen, or Mission, Rio Grande City. So you don't have to go to the people who go to Espinazo are at a different level I was once in Espinazo, and I was talking to this woman, Panita, who's since died, and she was the leader of the church.
Was she related to him, a descendant?
She was not. No? She was the daughter of his right-hand man, Victor Zapata. Her name was Ciprianita Zapata. And I was having a conversation with she was in trance, and I'm having a conversation with the Niño Fidencio about some personal issues. You mentioned anxiety, about some personal issues. It just happened that it had something to do with a woman. Or women. You know me.
How surprising.
Yeah, how surprising. So then, the following week, I had to go to Chicago for a conference. And I knew that there was a healer of the Niño Fidencio in Chicago, and he had a yerberia, an herb store. Yeah. And so I made an appointment, I made time to go see him. And during the course of our conversation, he went into a trance, and he brought down the Niño Fidencio. And that Niño Fidencio continued the conversation that I was having with him in Espinazo, using names, proper names. Now, how in the hell? I mean, that really sets you back. You got to sit back and think about that. You know, if the Niño Fidencio in Espinazo uses the name, I'm not going to mention the name, and then you go to Chicago a week later, and the same name comes up, you have to really wonder about this stuff. Because I try my best to stay neutral. I mean, I'm an anthropologist. I'm supposed to stay in the middle of the road, examine it. My role is to document, not necessarily to believe. But there have been I've had many experiences that shake your faith and make you question what you thought you knew.
Well, isn't this the problem that Carlos Castañeda had when he did the Yaqui way of knowledge, that he got too involved?
Yeah, he made that all up, by the way. We know that. We've documented that he was a fraud.
Really?
Carlos Castañeda never left Los Angeles. It was all made up. He invented it. Yeah, you got to study that. But
he should have just written a novel.
Yeah, he could have just written it. It wouldn't have been the same.
No.
But yes, that's exactly, allegedly, how that worked.
Yeah. Because my understanding is when he wrote that as a dissertation.
That's right, which was never accepted.
Which was never accepted. They didn't accept it because he couldn't produce the documentation.
Exactly
right?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right.
But he sold 1 million copies.
More than that.
Right.
Has been translated into every language.
And then he went.
I don't think he needed the PhD.
I don't think so.
That's right.
Well, another question I had for you is that what are casitas? He talked about
cajitas.
Yeah, cajitas.
A cajita is a caja, a little box. A cajita is a little box, and so it's a beautiful metaphor that Mexicans have created to describe the spirit. The spirit of Fidencio comes down into a little box. The box is, of course, a person. Right. In Spanish we say materia. The transmedium is the cajita. Or that caja, because it could be a male or female.
And this was kind of central to his theology or philosophy, right? This idea of
Yeah, because as I said, he predicted that he would continue his healing ministry, and does, and continues it. I mean, he died in 1938, and here we are in 2016, and he's still working strong, going strong, and he works by transmediums, who are curanderas, channel his, which is the highest level, by the way, of curanderismo, channel his spirit and do healing.
Do they go somewhere to get training on how to do this?
No. Not if they're real. They receive a gift.
Okay.
A gift. And very often that gift, that spiritual gift of healing, runs in families. So very often, an example that's often repeated is a young girl will have an aunt. Right. And her aunt, this is a story from Brownsville, Texas. A young girl will have an aunt or aunts, and her aunts will be healers. And she is they're very fond of her, and she's always around her aunts, and her aunts may tell her, mijita, tú tienes el don. You have the gift of healing. And so that's the first prediction. Of course, that might be a self-fulfilling prophecy itself. Who knows? But then that's something that's passed on from generation to generation through families. But no, there's no graduate school of curanderismo. I don't know. There might be somewhere, but that's all fake.
So next month, they're going to have the festival that's
The big
in every
festival
October.
in October,
and
yes.
Are you going?
I'm going.
Okay. And what are you going to do there?
Just be there.
Just be there?
Yeah. I've written a book. I'm going to take some
you
books.
You can sell your book.
No, I'm going to give it. I'm going to give my books to the people that helped me.
Okay.
So I'm taking 4 or 5 books to present. At this point, I've been doing it for so long. I mean, I'm like a city councilman in Espinosa. Everybody knows me, but I haven't been there in 3 or 4 years because of the violence on the roads in Mexico, on the highways. But now I'm going in a bus. I'm not even driving. I'm going to take a bus to Monterey and then a small bus out to Espinosa. My favorite. At one time, I had a house there. I actually had a house, but with a curandero in Edinburgh, but we had to sell it because he got sick and eventually died, and he needed the money, so I agreed to sell my house. But I like to sit on the main drag, the Avenue of Pain, as it's called, and just watch the world go by.
Just always an anthropologist.
That's right, yes. No, I just sit there and drink coffee and watch the world go by. People come up and greet me. Don Antonio, ¿cómo estás? And blah, blah, blah. I'll have my book out there, and that's all. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to do anything else.
Where do people stay? I mean, there's so many people. You like 50,000 people in this little town.
There's 50,000 people.
They have hotels?
No. I'm told there is now a little hotel, but no, you have to be totally self-contained. Wow. You have to have your food in your tent. They take tents, so it becomes a tent, almost like it was in the 1920s. It became a tent city, right. And so you pitch your tents. You have now many people, the better off curanderas, and especially those from the United States, have constructed little cinder block homes, and so they bring their people and they stay there. And yeah,
do they have music?
Oh, it's a constant. It's very, very, very musical. It's constant, and the music never stops because you have the strolling minstrels, the conjuntos that are singing Fidencio songs, and then you have the matachin dancers with the drums, and it's a blare of music. The music and the sounds never stop, and the other thing is it's dust everywhere.
Oh my!
Because nothing's paved. It's all dirt. The main drag is now paved, but the matachin dancers are slapping the ground with their sandals, kicking up the dust, and so the fiesta takes place in a cloud of dust. But it's
a great image. Really.
No, it's a sensory overload. Yeah. Let me tell you, the very first time I went in the middle '80s, I couldn't get the sounds out of my head. I mean, I'd be teaching a class, or I'd stop. And they would all come back. It would all be there. The fiesta would be taking place in my head.
And have you ever? This is an old term now. Videotaped this.
I took the very first videotape I borrowed when Texas Southmost College Media Center bought their very first VHS machine, which was about 40 pounds, big monster. And I convinced them to let me take it to Espinosa. And so that was as far as I can tell, now everybody's got an iPhone now, but I have videotape and film all the way from 1985 to the present. So I've documented the changes over a quarter of a century. So yeah, I have hour upon hour, all the generations from VHS to Super VHS, to Beta, and film. The University of Texas School of Communications professor Ira Abrams came to Espinosa, brought his graduate film class, and did a little film. So yeah, we've got a lot of that.
And now you can even do it on your iPhone.
Now you do it on your iPhone.
Right?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, one last question for you. Why should we read this book?
Well, there are several reasons. It represents a little known but very important part of Mexican history. I didn't even mention to you the fact, and I'm going to mention it now, that Francisco Madero, the first president, post-revolutionary president of Mexico, was a spiritist. Mm-hmm. And he himself channeled spirits. Mm-hmm. And he was a friend of the owner of the hacienda, a German, Theodoro von Wernisch. So there's a whole, the book is Mexican history. So anyone, you're not going to read this anyplace else. Anyone who's interested in Mexican history, northern Mexican history, will have a wealth of information. As it turns out, there was a wandering holy man on the desert, went right through Espinazo in the 1860s, who predicted that the Messiah would appear here. Think about that. So 1860s to 1920s, and then the Fidencio appears. So there's a wealth of not only Mexican history, but contemporary Mexican-American anthropology that is talked about in my book.
Something that's always confused me about Mexican history is that I think of Mexico as a supremely Catholic country, and I can't imagine a time when Catholicism was outlawed. It just doesn't
right up
compute
until
for
recently.
me.
Yeah, it was. And if you read about the Cristero Revolt, churches and lands were expropriated. It was thought that the Catholic Church, at one time, the Catholic Church owned about 1/3 of the landmass in Mexico, and all that was expropriated and put into ejidos after the Revolution. The jewels and gold and silver from the churches were looted. Catholic priests were expelled or assassinated. Many were put up, fell before the firing squad. So I can remember when I was a middle school kid at St. Joseph Academy in Brownsville, Texas, we had a number of brothers, Marist brothers, who were Mexicans. And they would tell us about the fact that they could not wear, priests and nuns and other brothers could not wear their habits, could not wear their religious clothing because they could be arrested for doing so. Because officially, it's like many things. Look at our own country. The federal government outlaws marijuana. Marijuana is illegal. Right. It's a drug. But in the state of Colorado, you go down to the store and buy marijuana. So same thing with the Catholic Church in Mexico. While it was always there, it was unofficial and illegal.
That's so
until
bizarre.
1993. That's right.
Yeah. We've been talking to Dr. Antonio Zavaleta about his new book, El Niño Fidencio and the Fidencistas, available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's a good read. Pick it up or download it today. Tony, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
For
That's your
joining
copy.
us.
I'm giving you a copy.
Thank you so much.
May the Niño Fidencio bless you.
You can listen to this interview again anytime on Good Books Radio YouTube or Good Books Radio Facebook. You can also write to us at any time at goodbooksradioshow@gmail.com. For Good Books Radio and for audiobooks.com, I'm Dr. W.F. Strong, signing off. It's been my pleasure to be your host today. As always, here's hoping that all your books are good reads.